constipation. We know it's a major issue in our community. I was astounded. 3 or 4 years ago, PADS undertook a sort of straw poll almost of our families of children. Roughly, most were under the age of 3, I think. And I was amazed, the incidence, it was just over 70% of our little ones had at some point suffered constipation. And I know through sort of local friends that it can become a real chronic condition. So you're going to talk us through, understand how constipation presents and how parents can, with healthcare professionals, work to try and alleviate the symptoms and make it as manageable as possible.
Yeah. As you say, constipation is very common. Bowel problems, in fact, are not uncommon in children with Down syndrome, and we know that some children can be born with congenital abnormalities of the bowel, including Hirschsprung's disease, imperforate anus, duodenal atresia, and with constipation being the biggest factor, with 70% or more having problems with constipation to a lesser or greater degree. It usually, it's what's called idiopathic. So that means there is no underlying comorbidities, no underlying cause. And we feel it's so common in children with Down syndrome because we know that Down syndrome can affect children's bowels, but the biggest contributory factor is low abdominal muscle tone, and that often results in what's called slow gut transit. It means that normally the peristalsis within the bowel pushes the food along. Within children with Down syndrome, it can be much slower, and that's not a major problem. The only issue is that the large bowel, the main function of the large bowel is to withdraw water from the poo. When it enters the large bowel, it's very liquidy, and by the time it comes out the other end, it's hopefully a nice soft formed poo. But if you think about it, the longer that poo takes to travel through the large bowel, the more water is taken out. And so the more water is taken out of the poo, the harder it gets. And it's more difficult then. That even slows the gut down further because you've got this big, heavy lump of poo which has to be pushed further along. And so it's almost self-perpetuates. Usually, there's 3 points in a child's life when we know it can trigger, which is weaning, which is stopping breastfeeding, introducing cow's milk and starting solids, and often at the time the fluids, they may drink less. So there's weaning, potty training, a lot, and this is for typical children as well. When some children don't like pooing in the potty, and starting school, when there's different routine, different toilets. So, as we've mentioned previously, when we're talking about the toilet training steps, because we can almost predict the vast majority of children will develop constipation, we need to look at strategies to actually prevent it happening. So, we look at fluid intake, diet, and potty sitting. However, once constipation is established, it must be treated with laxatives. The children will not grow out of it. It doesn't get better on its own. It needs to be treated. And I know some parents can be anxious about laxatives because you hear, wives' tales and myths, or if you give laxatives, it makes the bowel lazy. Children shouldn't have to take laxatives. The problem is, it's not the laxatives that cause the problem, it's the constipation, it's the poo that overstretches the bowel. And because it's overstretched, that weakens it even more. And so you have this vicious circle developing. And so I think it is important that if parents do suspect their child is constipated, they seek advice from a healthcare professional. The problem is constipation can actually start quite insidiously. So often parents don't realise their child is constipated until they're bunged up with what we call fecal impaction. When there's so much poo, it's so clumped together, it's almost impossible for the child to pass naturally. But what happens is all this poo is stuck in their bottom, but you've got the liquidy poo that's coming through from higher up, and that sort of scoots round the hard poo. And also, as the poo is sitting there, it irritates in the rectum, because normally the rectum is not designed as a storage. It normally doesn't have poo in. The only time you have poo in your rectum is when you need to do a poo. At other times it's empty, but because it's got this big lump of poo in, it irritates the rectum. And what it does, it makes it produce more mucus. And that sort of starts to soften bits of the poo. And because there's lots of poo in the rectum, the body thinks, oh, they're going to do a poo. So what they do, they start to relax the anus, or what's called the bum hole. And because it's relaxed, all this horrible, and which can be quite smelly, liquidy poo comes out, and there might be bits in it. And often the parents think, oh, he's got diarrhea. And what it's not, it's overflow soiling. Yeah. So as a general rule of thumb, to give sort of an idea about what we would expect in terms of pooing, we would expect most children to poo at least 3 times a week, but no less than 3 times a day. So if your child is only pooing twice a week,
no more than 3 times a day.
No more than 3 times a day. Yeah. So if your child doing lots and lots of little poos and runny poos and smelly poos in the day, more than 3, we suspect overflow soiling. Yeah. If they're only doing 2 or 3 poos a week, they could be constipated. But saying that, children can poo every day and still be constipated, because what they're not doing is not evacuating their bowel fully. So it can be quite a confusing picture.
Very.
So, but constipation can cause other problems, tummy ache, wind. It can cause the inability of the bladder to empty properly. It may get a UTI. So I think if the child presents with any other symptoms, we always say, let's check they're not constipated first. And that's
sickness. We've seen quite a few children in our groups, haven't we, who, are physically sick because the body just is trying to expel the waste, really, isn't it? And I was astounded. I had no idea that somebody can be constipated and still pass poo. And I know, you say that can be mucousy. It can be like these little solid rabbit droppings, aren't they? Because we'll often see that in our closed groups. We're going, well, they're doing these poos, and smearing's another indicator, isn't it? As you say, that people think, well, there is poo coming out, but basically the child's really, really bunged up.
To help children or parents suss out if their child's doing a nice poo, there's what called the Bristol stool form chart, which is pictures of poo from 1 to 7, and 1 being the rabbit dropping, 7 being the very runny watery poo. Number 4, which is a nice smooth sausage, is what we're aiming for.
That's the optimum poo, guys. You need to be a number 4.
That's what we're looking for. And really, there should be no straining. No. So you're looking for, if you suspect constipation, we always ask how often they're pooing. And it's not just how often, it's not just the frequency, it's the consistency is important. Yes. Because the child could be doing 3 poos a week, absolutely fine, lovely type 4 poos, no problems whatsoever. Right. You could have another child who's doing 4 poos a week, but is really straining, crying, appears to have some tummy upset, and really and they're passing type 2 or 3 poos. And that would warrant further investigation and possible treatment. So you have to look at both the frequency and the consistency.
And it's the Bristol stool chart that is so easily
and if you just Google that, there's hundreds of them in all shapes and sizes. You can even get chocolate cake.
Yeah, I've seen that. And crocheted samples and so on. Literally, So if the child has constipation, something else that was enlightening to me, I've only ever thought of a laxative as being what I've subsequently gone on to discover is as a stimulant. So I think we've all seen an advert where someone sat watching the telly or something, they've had a laxative and there's this urgency to go to the loo. So that's a stimulant laxative that
Well, stimulant laxatives are designed to work within 8 to 12 hours.
Right.
So the idea is you take it overnight. And we've all seen that television advert. So
I'm trying to think where...
a woman, or constipation,
Not pain,
takes
yeah.
a little pill, and the next morning she's skipping down the stairs because she's perfect.
So a stimulant has sort of
but it doesn't-
propelled, kind of,
It doesn't always work like that,
No.
When children are what we start them off is what we call a softener or an osmotic laxative. The generic term is a macrogel. But you've got, obviously you've got Cosmicol, Laxido, but they're all, and Movicol, and they're all similar brands, just different manufacturers' names. And what that does, it's a powder mixed with water, 62.5 mils of water. And that water then locks within the poo. It travels as a bolus right through the small intestine till it gets to the large bowel, and where it locks within the liquidy poo. And so no matter how long that poo is sitting in the large intestine, that 62 mils of water is locked within the poo. It can't come out, it's locked in, and that keeps the poo soft. And because it's got that extra water in, it bulks it up, and that stimulates natural peristalsis, so that helps move it along as well. And because it's got water in it, it's quite slippy, so it's lubricated, so it's easy to pass. So they work by softening, lubricating, and stimulating natural peristalsis. And the thing about macrogols, they work only on the poo. It's not absorbed, it's called macrogol, macro meaning big. So the molecules are too big to be absorbed in the body. So it just works in the bowel, in the poo. So it's very safe for children. Now, stimulant laxatives work slightly differently. They are absorbed into the body, and they work on the muscles, the nerve cells that stimulate peristalsis within the bowel. So if a child is on a macrogol or a poo softener, despite the poo being nice and soft and good consistency, the child is still unable to pass it. It may well be because of this slow gut transit. There isn't enough propulsion in their bowel to push all this soft poo out. And so we sometimes will suggest the addition of a stimulant laxative to help push this soft poo out. And so the combination of a stimulant and a softener is very common. Nice guidelines to produce for a whole variety of different conditions, and they produce a nice guidance for childhood constipation. And within that, that's best practice in terms of how children should be assessed and treated. And also, parents can go online and they can see what medication, what laxatives should be prescribed, and what dose and how much. And we find that often long-term laxative use may be required. It almost takes as long as the child was constipated for the child to fully recover. We mentioned about how constipation overstretches the bowel, so we have to give the bowel time to recover. So you just don't take it for 2 days. You have to take it for a good 3 to 6 months, and some children may be on it long term.
I think that's a really important thing that we see often. Families, I think traditionally we're used to taking a medication, it cures something and we end. But with this instance, as you say, the bowel's been stretched with that old dry poo, and being a muscle, it takes time for that to recover, because every day more waste is being generated and it just perpetuates, doesn't it? But so many of our families think, they've been for a poo, they're cleared out, I'll stop the medication, and then 2 months later they're like, I think they're constipated again. So it's really important to have like this a maintenance dose.
Well, yes, and often parents will say, how long do I need to take it for? Well, your child's poo will tell you, because as I say, we're aiming for a daily soft formed type 4 poo, and as long as the child passes that, whatever dose of medication they're on, they need to stay on that dose, because it's that dose of medicine that's enabling them to produce this nice poo. Now, if mum finds then, or dad finds, that the poo is going from a type 4 to say a type 5, which is a bit softer, that tells us that's good because the bowel is recovering, the peristalsis is improving. So that's an indication to reduce the dose. It should never stop, the dose of laxative. You should taper it off.
Yeah.
So the child's poo will tell you if you need to take more or less. If they're passing a type 4 poo and maybe they've gone off their food or they haven't drunk very much, they might find suddenly it's a type 3 and it's a bit, uncomfortable to pass. That's an indication, just give them a bit more, say another half a sachet or a whole sachet. And so what we suggest is the parents get a Bristol poo chart and just keep an eye on the child's poo and adjust the dose. Now, because the macrogals are working with the poo as it's being formed, it can take a couple of days to really have an effect. And so if parents are altering the dose of a macrogal, then they're not to do it more frequently than at least every other day, because otherwise you won't know what dose produced the nice poo. Now, stimulant laxatives work within 8 to 12 hours on paper. In theory, it could be shorter or longer. So again, it's judgment in terms of when to give it. Ideally, the idea is you give it before, an evening before bed, and then you poo the next morning. But that may not work for some families if it's, up for school, quick, have you got your bag? And it's all mad rush. We've got to get the school bus or whatever. And so you can actually adjust the timing of the poo or help adjust the timing of the poo by adjusting the timing of the stimulant. Some parents find it works better if they give it in the morning because it takes nearly 24 hours, or it takes he's ready to poo by the time he comes home from school. So the idea being is to try and adjust the timing of the poo so it's ideally outside the school day.
So you also mentioned there are sort of 3 actions to take to try and prevent constipation. As you say, once it's established, it needs to be treated. So we could talk a little about those. That's sort of the fluid intake, diet, and for our little ones, we really advocate sitting on the potty. So in terms of fluid intake,
again, if parents look at the NICE guidance, we are on average between 900 and 1200 mils a day. Water-based drinks spread throughout the day. In terms of diet, well, obviously fruit and veg. Within some fruit, particularly stone fruits, there's something called the opposite of pectin. It's called
sorbitol.
Sorbitol, that's it. Sorbitol, which is a natural laxative, works a bit as a poo softener because it draws in water. I don't know whether you've ever noted on a packet of mints, it says contains sorbitol. Taken in excess may produce diarrhea. So it's used as an artificial sweetener as well. But we know that sorbitol is present a lot in stone fruits and apples and pears, and really help as a natural way. It's highest in dried fruits such as prunes.
Figs and prunes, aren't they very good? Yeah.
Really, really good. I just wanted to mention about apples, that it's fresh apples, not stewed apples. Stewed apples contain pectin. And we give stewed apples for children who have got diarrhea.
So it's the converse.
How you make jam with the pectin, it solidifies the jam.
Okay, and that's the opposite of what we're wanting. Right, so fruits with stones are particularly good. Fluid intake, I think that's one that really gets overlooked.
Yeah, because parents always say they're a terrible drinker. So you have to be quite inventive in terms of encouraging, and though we say water-based drinks, water, but if your child just refuses water, you could put a few drops of sugar-free cordial in, and particularly if it changes the colour and
makes it more interesting. But it is something I think people just aren't aware of. So, and I think, a lot of the work we try to do at PADS is about letting parents know these sort of good practice to try and prevent things. So lots of fluids. You really can't drink too many fluids in terms of health. The healthy diet in terms of the sort of stone fruits. And then what's the thing I always, you were saying, like for breakfast, avoid
Weetabix, because there's actually
other brands.
Yes, absolutely. There are 2 types of fibre, soluble and insoluble fibre.
Okay.
And most food contains bits of each.
Right.
But some foods have more soluble and some have more insoluble.
Yeah.
Soluble fibre, as the name suggests, it's soluble in water. So it forms a gel.
Right.
And again, that helps bulk up the poo, keep it soft and what have you.
So soluble fibre's good.
Soluble fibre is good. And that's why we suggest, which is something like oats.
Okay, so porridge.
Porridge rather than wheat-based products, which are insoluble. Generally, when you're talking about constipation, you say eat more fibre. But for our children with Down syndrome, I think we have to be careful about what fibre the children eat. We mentioned earlier on about slow gut transit, so the poo moves really slowly. Now, insoluble fibre is not digested, so it's stays as fibre.
Right.
And think about a mouse who's got to roll a ball up a hill. Now, what's going to be easier for that mouse to roll the ball? Is it going to be a tennis ball or a cricket ball?
Right.
The cricket ball is solid and heavy and dense.
Yeah.
And it's going to be so much easier for the mouse to push the tennis ball, the light ball.
Yeah.
So if a child has a lot of insoluble fibre, it makes the poo hard and solid. And if they have too much, it actually makes the constipation worse because it just sits there and clogs. And then you get more and more and more, and actually it makes the constipation worse. And so that's why I think it's important to look at the type of fibre that children are eating. And they may be eating loads and loads of fibre, but the wrong type of fibre. So have a look at
That's really interesting to know. Yeah. Gosh, there's a lot to learn, isn't there? Yeah, and then the final thing, so we've talked about fluid intake, looking at fibre, and being careful about the types of fibre, but then also sitting on the potty. So that's about the position and so on, isn't it?
Or the toilet with knees higher than the hips.
Yeah. So if they're on a toilet. So say that again. The knee has to be higher than the hip.
Well, that just gives that squatty position.
Right.
And in fact, some adults will use that because it makes it much easier. When you use that squat position, if you think about your large bowel, there's a kink at the bottom, there's a bit of a bend before it gets to the rectum where the poo sits. And then when you're actually sitting on the toilet and in a more squatty position, that very action relaxes the pelvic floor and straightens the bottom of the bowel. And so the poo, rather than having to go round a corner.
Yeah, it's a more direct.
It's more direct route.
Right.
And that's why you find children with constipation who've got a bit of a sore bottom are really reluctant to sit on the toilet, because once they're sitting on the toilet with their knees up and the pelvic floor relaxed, it's very difficult for them to stop the poo coming out, and particularly if they think it's going to hurt. And that's the other thing parents can look for if they notice their child prefers to stand to poo. That's an indication that sometime they may have passed a poo that was a bit uncomfortable. And so when they're standing, they can squeeze their bottom together and stop the poo coming out. When they're sitting like that, it's harder for them to do, and that's why.
Right. Yeah, we certainly see that a lot with the children who are still in nappies. And you say often the child who's constipated might sort of go out of view. They don't want to be seen. They, as you say, they do want to be stood up. And then also, am I right in remembering that they're more prevalent to poo at night?
No, sometimes they do. They'll hold onto their poo all day, and they wait till the nighttime nappy comes on.
So is that constipation, or is that more?
That's more
comfort of pooing in a nappy. Right, beg your pardon, that's my confusion. Right.
But saying that, physiologically, most infants young children will stop pooing at night once weaning is fully established, so round about 9 to 12 months. So if you've got an 18-month-old or a 2-year-old toddler or an older child who's pooing at night, that's a clear indication there's something going wrong. So after 12 months, we should see no poos at night.
Right, okay. Excellent. Well, thank you, June. I mean, it's such an important topic, I think, for our parents to know about, because, you know, prevention is so much better than cure in this for everybody, but particularly in this, because it is such a downward spiral, I think, we see with our children. It sets in and it can take a long, long time.
It self-perpetuates and it can go on for years. Yes. And we know that once the bowel's been overstretched, unless it's actively treated and managed, it stays like that. Yeah. And we have had problems with teenagers and young adults having huge problems with what's called acquired megacolon megarectum, which can be life-threatening. Right.
That's very, very sad. So, okay, so there's lots of information on our website, Down Syndrome UK, specifically around constipation, and we do our information sharing sessions and you know, join the groups and seek advice. Well, obviously go to a healthcare professional, but for sort of general guidance and support, do make contact. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, June.
Thank you.